Hey everyone, welcome back. I've got another wild one for you today. And trust me, this one's going to leave you questioning just how well you really know the person sleeping next to you. It starts off innocent enough. A husband notices something strange in his own home. Something small, something easy to miss. But once he starts pulling that thread, what he uncovers isn't just unsettling. It's the kind of discovery that cracks open an entire double life. Before we dive in, quick shout out to everyone who's been showing up, commenting, and supporting the channel. You might not realize it, but your engagement helps this community grow and keeps these stories coming. Now, grab your coffee, get comfortable, because this first story, it begins with one man who thought he was just being paranoid. I thought I was just being paranoid. You know that feeling when something in your house just feels slightly off, but you can't quite put your finger on it? That was me for about 3 weeks. I'd be lying in bed at night and I'd get this weird sense that something was different about our bedroom, but I couldn't figure out what. My wife seemed normal. Work was fine, life was life, but that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. Then, one Saturday morning, I was adjusting the curtains because the sun was hitting my face at a weird angle, and that's when I saw it. A tiny camera, no bigger than a USB drive, tucked into the corner of our window frame. It was angled outward, pointing directly at our neighbor's house across the street. Not at our bedroom, not at us, at Mark's place. My first thought was that someone had planted it there to spy on us. Maybe we'd been robbed and didn't know it yet. Maybe someone was casing our house. I was already pulling out my phone to call the police when I noticed the camera wasn't dusty. It was clean, recently placed, and when I looked closer, I recognized the model. It was the same brand as the security camera my wife had bought for our front porch last year. I didn't say anything to her right away. I know that probably sounds paranoid, but something in my gut told me to check the camera first. I popped out the SD card while she was in the shower and plugged it into my laptop. What I found made my stomach drop. Hours and hours of footage. Days worth. But none of it was our bedroom. Every single file was focused on Mark's house. Mark leaving for work at 7:15 every morning. Mark coming home around 6. Mark walking his dog. Mark getting his mail. Mark washing his car in his driveway. There were timestamps going back almost 2 months. My wife had been systematically recording our neighbor's every move, and I had no idea why. I confronted her that afternoon. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just put the SD card on the kitchen table and asked her to explain. The look on her face told me everything. She went pale, then red, then she just started crying. Not the kind of crying you do when you're caught doing something wrong. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and broken. This is where it gets absurd. She told me that Mark was her ex-boyfriend. Not just any ex. The ex. The one who disappeared 5 years ago without a trace. She said his name was Daniel back then, and they'd been together for almost 3 years. One day, he just vanished. No breakup. No explanation. His apartment was cleared out. His phone was disconnected. His social media went dark. She filed a missing persons report, but the police found nothing. His family told her he'd moved abroad for work and wanted a clean break, but she never believed them. She was convinced something terrible had happened to him. Then, 6 months ago, we moved into this house, and she saw Mark for the first time. She swore it was him. Same face, same walk, same mannerisms. She said he'd faked his death or gone into witness protection or changed his identity, and now he was living across the street from us like nothing had ever happened. She'd been gathering evidence to prove it. She was building a case. She had plans to confront him once she had enough footage to be certain. I didn't even know where to start. I asked her why she didn't just go talk to him, why she didn't tell me any of this, why she'd been secretly surveilling our neighbor for months like some kind of low-budget private investigator. She said she was afraid I wouldn't believe her. She said she needed proof first. She said she thought I'd think she was crazy. She wasn't wrong about that last part. I told her we needed to handle this the right way. I wasn't going to let her keep stalking our neighbor based on a hunch, so I did what any rational person would do. I went over to Mark's house and knocked on his door. He answered, confused but polite, and I asked him if he'd ever gone by the name Daniel. He looked at me like I'd just asked him if he believed in Bigfoot. No, he'd never been Daniel. He'd lived in this town his whole life. He'd never disappeared. He'd never even left the state for more than a vacation. Then came the breaking point. I showed him a photo of my wife. Did he recognize her? Had they ever met? He stared at the picture for a long time, and then he shook his head. He had no idea who she was. He'd seen her around the neighborhood, sure, but they'd never spoken. He asked me if everything was okay, and I lied and said yes, just a misunderstanding, sorry to bother you. I walked back to my house feeling like I'd just stepped out of a Twilight Zone episode. When I told my wife what Mark said, she didn't believe me. She insisted he was lying. She said he was probably scared or didn't want to be found. She started spiraling, talking about how she needed to get closer, maybe follow him to work, maybe run into him at the grocery store and see if he recognized her voice. That's when I realized how deep this went. This wasn't just lingering feelings for an ex. This was obsession. This was something that had broken in her years ago and never healed. I sat her down and told her we needed to talk about Daniel. Really talk. Not about Mark, about what happened 5 years ago. And that's when the whole story came out. She'd met Daniel online. They'd dated for 3 years, but they'd never actually met in person. He always had an excuse: work, family emergency, travel. She'd video chatted with him countless times, sent him money when he said he was in trouble, planned a future with him. And then one day, he was just gone. Everything deleted, every account wiped. She tried to track him down and found nothing. No records, no trace. It was like he'd never existed. She'd been catfished. Completely and utterly catfished. And she'd never fully accepted it. She'd convinced herself that Daniel was real, that he'd loved her, that something terrible must have happened to him. She couldn't let go of the idea that he was out there somewhere. And when she saw Mark, her brain just latched onto him as the answer. It gave her someone to focus on, someone to prove her story to, someone to make it all make sense. I genuinely thought this couldn't get worse. I was wrong. I asked her how long she'd known, deep down, that Mark wasn't Daniel. She didn't answer right away. Then she admitted she'd had doubts for weeks. She said Mark's voice was different. His mannerisms weren't quite right. He was taller than she remembered, but she didn't want to accept it because accepting it meant accepting that Daniel never existed in the first place. And that was too painful. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you are watching from, because trust me, these stories only get wilder. Now, back to the madness, because what I found on that camera was just the beginning of unraveling my wife's obsession. We're in therapy now, couples therapy and individual therapy for her. She's been diagnosed with a mix of unresolved trauma and obsessive tendencies that went untreated for years. The catfishing incident shattered her ability to trust her own judgment, and instead of processing that, she buried it. Seeing Mark just ripped the wound open again. She deleted all the footage. She apologized to Mark through a letter, though I don't think he ever really understood what was happening. He was just relieved we weren't some kind of criminal surveillance operation. We've barely spoken to him since. I think he's creeped out, and honestly, I don't blame him. The hardest part for me isn't even the camera or the obsession. It's knowing that my wife was living in this completely separate reality for months, and I had no idea. I keep asking myself what I missed. Were there signs? Did she seem off and I just didn't notice? Or was she that good at hiding it? I still love her. I want to make that clear. But I can't unsee those hours of footage. I can't unhear her voice when she tried to convince me that our neighbor was a man who never existed. And every time I look out our bedroom window now, I think about what she saw when she looked out. Not a neighbor walking his dog, but a ghost she'd been chasing for 5 years. We're working through it. Some days are better than others. She's on medication now, and her therapist says she's making progress. But I don't think either of us will ever feel fully normal again. There's a crack in the foundation now, and I'm not sure if it can be fully repaired. I guess time will tell. But filming neighbors is one thing. Wait until you hear what happened when someone's emergency contact picked up the phone. I thought I knew what a bad day looked like. Turns out I had no idea. It started with a phone call from someone I'd never met. A woman named Carol from my boyfriend's office. Voice shaking, telling me that Jake had collapsed during a meeting and was being rushed to the hospital. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my keys, didn't even bother locking the door behind me. Just ran to my car and drove like my life depended on it. The whole drive there, my hands were trembling on the steering wheel. You know that feeling where your brain just goes into overdrive, imagining every worst-case scenario? That was me. Heart attack, stroke, some undiagnosed condition. I was terrified. I got to the hospital in record time, practically sprinted through the emergency room doors, and went straight to the front desk. The nurse looked up at me, and I barely got the words out. Jake Morrison. He was brought in maybe 20 minutes ago. He collapsed at work. I'm his girlfriend. She glanced at her computer, then back at me, and her expression shifted to something I couldn't quite read. Confusion, maybe, or awkwardness. His girlfriend is already here. She arrived about 10 minutes ago. I blinked. I'm sorry. What? His girlfriend, she repeated slowly, like I hadn't heard her the first time. Jessica. She's in the waiting area. The floor felt like it tilted under me. Jessica. I didn't know any Jessica. And I was definitely his girlfriend. We'd been together for over a year. I lived at his place half the week. We had plans to move in together next month. So who the hell was Jessica? I must have looked like I was about to pass out myself, because the nurse quickly pointed toward the waiting room. She's just through there if you want to, speak with her. I walked in that direction on autopilot, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. And then I saw her, sitting in one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs, scrolling through her phone with tears streaming down her face. She looked about my age, maybe a little younger. Dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, casual clothes like she'd also rushed out of wherever she was, and she looked genuinely distraught. I stood there for a second, just staring, and then she looked up and saw me. Our eyes met, and I don't know what came over me, but I walked right up to her. Are you Jessica? I asked. She nodded, wiping her eyes. Yeah, are you here for Jake? I'm his girlfriend, I said, and I watched her face go pale. What? She whispered. I'm his girlfriend, I repeated, slower this time. We've been together for over a year. She stood up so fast her phone nearly clattered to the floor. That's impossible. I'm his girlfriend. We've been together for 8 months. And that's when my world just completely shattered. We stood there staring at each other, both of us trying to process what the other had just said, and then, almost simultaneously, we both pulled out our phones. No words, just this silent mutual understanding that we needed proof. I opened my photo gallery first. There was Jake and me at the beach last summer. Jake and me at my sister's wedding. Jake and me on his couch 2 nights ago, watching some terrible reality show he pretended to hate, but definitely loved. Jessica did the same, and I watched as she scrolled through photo after photo of her and Jake. At a restaurant I recognized because we'd been there. At a hiking trail we'd gone to. At his apartment, the same apartment, wearing one of his hoodies that I'd worn a dozen times myself. Oh my God, I said. Oh my God, she echoed. We sat down. We had to. I felt like my legs were going to give out. And then we just started talking, comparing, cross-referencing our entire relationships like we were investigators piecing together a crime scene. And the more we talked, the worse it got. Same restaurants, same date nights. He'd taken us both to this little Italian place downtown, ordered the same wine, told us both it was his favorite spot. He'd used the same pet name for both of us. Babe. Real creative Jake. He told Jessica he worked late on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Guess what days I thought he had standing basketball games with his buddies? Tuesdays and Thursdays. This man had built an entire system, a schedule. He'd compartmentalized his life so thoroughly that neither of us had any idea the other existed. And he'd been doing it for 8 months. 8 months. Jessica was shaking. I was numb. We sat there in that waiting room, 2 strangers who just realized we'd been dating the same man, and honestly, if this were happening to someone else, I might have laughed at how absurd it was. But it wasn't happening to someone else. It was happening to me. Then came the breaking point. A doctor came out and told us Jake was stable. He'd had a severe panic attack, not a heart attack, but they were keeping him for observation and running some tests. They said we could see him soon, and Jessica and I just looked at each other. We're both going in, I said. She nodded. Absolutely. When they finally let us in, Jake was sitting up in the hospital bed, looking groggy but alert. He saw me first, and his face lit up for just a second before he noticed Jessica, standing right behind me, and I watched in real time as the color drained from his face. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. 2 ghosts, actually. Hey, babe, I said, voice dripping with sarcasm. Hey, babe, Jessica echoed, matching my tone. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. Honestly, I almost felt bad for him. Almost. So, I continued, crossing my arms. Funny story, Jessica and I just had a really interesting conversation in the waiting room. This isn't what it looks like, he finally croaked out, and I swear to God, I almost laughed. Jessica beat me to it. Really, Jake, that's what you're going with? Because it looks like you've been dating both of us for 8 months. It's complicated, he stammered, sitting up straighter, and you could see the panic in his eyes. He was scrambling, trying to come up with some explanation, some lie that would make this okay. But there wasn't one. Complicated, I repeated flatly. Right, let me simplify it for you. You're a liar. He tried to backtrack, started saying something about how things just got out of hand, how he cared about both of us, how he didn't know how to end things with either of us without hurting anyone. The words just kept spilling out, and none of them made any sense. It was like watching someone dig themselves deeper and deeper into a hole they'd never climb out of. And here's where it gets absurd. Jessica pulled out her phone and held it up so he could see the screen. We signed a lease together last week, Jake. A lease. For an apartment. Our apartment. I put down a deposit. We were supposed to move in next month. My head snapped toward her. You what? She nodded, eyes welling up again. We went apartment hunting 3 weeks ago. He said he wanted us to take the next step, that he was ready to build a life together. I felt like I was going to be sick, because guess what Jake had told me 2 weeks ago? That he wanted me to move in with him, into his current place, that he was ready for us to take the next step. He'd proposed moving in with both of us, at the same time, to 2 different places. I looked at him, and I didn't even recognize the person lying in that hospital bed. You're unbelievable. He started to say something, but I held up my hand. I was done. I didn't need to hear another word. I turned to Jessica. Good luck with all this. I'm out. She looked at me and I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Yeah, me too. We walked out together, left him sitting there in that hospital bed, probably realizing that his entire double life had just imploded in the span of 20 minutes, and honestly, he deserved every second of it. Jessica and I exchanged numbers before we left, not because we were going to be friends or anything, but because we both agreed that if he tried to contact either of us with some sob story, we'd let the other one know. Solidarity, I guess. I found out later through a mutual friend that Jessica did dump him, broke the lease, got her deposit back, and blocked him on everything. I did the same, blocked his number, his social media, packed up the stuff I had at his place, and left it in a box outside his door with a note that just said, "Get help." Jake recovered, physically anyway. His double life, dead on arrival. And the best part? His co-workers found out. Carol, the one who called me, apparently pieced it together when both Jessica and I showed up at the hospital. Word spread fast. Last I heard, he became the office gossip for months. Sometimes people really do write their own downfall. They get so caught up in the lie, so confident they can juggle it all, that they forget how easily it can all come crashing down. And when it does, it's almost poetic. Jake thought he was smart enough to keep 2 relationships going indefinitely. Turns out all it took was 1 panic attack and an emergency contact form he forgot to update. I don't think about him much anymore. When I do, I mostly just feel sorry for him. Not because of what happened, but because he had something real with me. Probably something real with Jessica too, and he threw it all away because he thought he could have everything without consequences. That's not how life works, and he learned that the hard way. Emergency contacts can reveal a lot, but what about when a simple DNA test destroys everything you thought you knew about your own blood? My brother has always been the kind of guy who thinks he's hilarious. Last Christmas, he was going through this whole ancestry phase, talking about heritage and bloodlines and all that stuff. So I got him one of those DNA test kits as a gag gift. You know the ones. Spit in a tube, mail it off, find out you're 3% Scandinavian or whatever. He thought it was great, said he was going to prove once and for all that he got all the good genes in the family. We joked about it for weeks. He'd send me screenshots of the processing updates like it was some kind of countdown to a big reveal. I didn't think much of it. It was just another thing we were messing around with. Then the results came in, and everything went silent. He called me on a Tuesday night, and I could tell immediately something was wrong. His voice had this hollow quality to it, like he'd just watched someone die. He said we needed to talk in person. Not over the phone, not over text, in person. I drove to his place thinking maybe he'd gotten bad health news or something. Maybe the test flagged some genetic disorder. I was not prepared for what he actually told me. We shared 0% DNA. Not distant cousins, not half siblings. Zero. According to the test, we weren't related at all. At first, I thought it was a mistake. These kits aren't perfect, right? Maybe the lab mixed up samples. Maybe his spit got contaminated. But he'd already gone down that road. He'd contacted the company, rechecked everything, even paid for a second test to confirm. Same results. We were strangers, genetically speaking. He confronted our parents that same week. I wasn't there for it, but he told me later that the second he brought it up, our mum started crying. Not the kind of crying where you're trying to defend yourself. The kind where you know the truth just walked into the room and sat down at the table. Our dad went quiet, didn't say a word, just stared at the floor like he was waiting for it to swallow him whole. And here's where it gets absurd. Turns out our mum had an affair 30 years ago. She got pregnant and the guy wasn't our dad, but our dad knew. He'd known the entire time. He'd made the choice to raise my brother anyway, to treat him like his own son, to never say a word about it. For 3 decades, they'd both carried this secret, and nobody else in the family had any idea. But that wasn't even the worst part. My brother wanted to know who his real father was. He had a right to know, obviously, and when our mum finally told him, I swear I felt the ground shift under my feet, even though I wasn't in the room. His biological father was my uncle, my mum's sister's husband, the guy we'd been having Thanksgiving dinner with our entire lives. They'd had an affair during a rough patch in both their marriages. My mum and dad were going through something. My aunt and uncle were fighting. And somehow, in the middle of all that mess, my mum and my uncle ended up together. It was brief, she said, a few months at most. And when she got pregnant, everyone involved made a decision. They buried it. My dad agreed to raise the kid. My uncle agreed to stay away. My aunt never found out. The family moved on, except now, 30 years later, my brother was standing in the middle of this bomb crater they'd all been pretending didn't exist. I didn't know how to process it. My brother, the guy I grew up with, shared a room with, fought with over the remote and stolen hoodies, was technically my cousin. And my uncle, this man who'd been at every birthday party, every graduation, every family event, was his father. Not just biologically, actually his father. And nobody thought to mention it. Family dinners became a nightmare. My brother refused to come to anything if our mum was going to be there. He said he couldn't look at her without feeling like his entire childhood was a lie. And honestly, I didn't blame him. She'd lied to him every single day of his life. So had our dad. So had our uncle. Everyone had agreed that keeping the secret was more important than telling him the truth. Things went from bad to unhinged. My aunt found out. I don't know how exactly. My brother says he didn't tell her, and I believe him, but somehow word got back to her. Maybe my uncle cracked under the pressure. Maybe someone else in the family let it slip. Either way, she knew. And she filed for divorce within a week. I ran into her at the grocery store a month later, and she looked like she'd aged 10 years. She told me she felt like an idiot. She said there were signs looking back. Times when my mum and my uncle were weird around each other. Moments that didn't quite add up. But she'd trusted them. She'd believed her husband and her sister when they said nothing was going on. And now she was 53 years old, sitting in a lawyer's office, dividing up assets from a marriage that had been built on a lie from the beginning. My brother still hasn't spoken to our mum. It's been months now. She's tried reaching out, writing letters, showing up at his apartment, but he won't engage. He says he doesn't know who she is anymore. The woman he thought was his mom wouldn't have done this. The woman he thought was his mom would have told him the truth. But that woman doesn't exist. She never did. Our dad's been trying to play peacemaker, which is almost funny considering he was part of the cover-up. He keeps saying that he loves my brother, that biology doesn't matter, that he's still his son no matter what. And maybe that's true. But it doesn't change the fact that my brother spent 30 years not knowing where he came from. It doesn't undo the lie. The family's fractured now in a way I don't think can be fixed. My aunt won't speak to my mum. My brother won't speak to either of our parents. My uncle's basically disappeared, moved to another state, refused to be involved in any of it. And me? I'm just stuck in the middle, trying to figure out how a $99 DNA kit managed to dismantle 3 decades of family harmony in the span of a single email notification. The worst part is how avoidable it all was. If they'd just told him from the beginning, maybe it wouldn't have been this catastrophic. Maybe he would have grown up knowing the truth, and it would have just been part of his story. But they chose to lie. They chose to protect themselves instead of preparing him, and now everyone's paying for it. I still see my brother regularly. We're trying to keep our relationship intact, but it's different now. He'll make comments sometimes, half joking, about how I'm the only real family he has left. And I know he's struggling with what that even means anymore. Is our dad still his dad? Is my mom still his mom? Or are they just people who raised him under false pretenses? I don't have answers for him. I'm not sure anyone does. I do know that I'll never look at those DNA test kits the same way again. Everyone treats them like party tricks, fun little novelties to find out if you're part Irish or descended from Vikings. But they're grenades, and sometimes when you pull the pin, you don't just blow up your own life. You take everyone else down with you. DNA doesn't lie, but sometimes the people closest to you do, especially when wedding photos accidentally capture more than just smiles. My aunt got married at 55, and honestly, it was one of the most beautiful weddings I'd ever been to. She'd waited her whole life for the right person, and when she finally found him, she went all out. Gorgeous venue, live band, open bar, the works. Everyone was in a great mood, the kind of celebration where you just feel genuinely happy for someone, you know. No drama, no tension, just pure joy. Or so I thought. The reception was in full swing when the photographer started making rounds with a tablet, showing off some of the shots he'd already uploaded. People were gathering around, pointing at themselves in the background, laughing at candid moments. The usual stuff. My cousin Derek and I were standing near the dessert table when he grabbed the tablet to scroll through. He was looking for a picture of him and his girlfriend, but what he found instead changed everything. It was a wide shot of the ceremony. Beautiful composition, my aunt and her husband at the altar, guests seated in neat rows, but Derek wasn't looking at the happy couple. He'd zoomed in on the back corner of the frame where a small cluster of people were standing, and in that cluster, partially obscured by a decorative column, was my Uncle Ron, Derek's dad, and next to him was a woman. Derek went completely still, like frozen. His face drained of color so fast I thought he was going to pass out. I asked him what was wrong, and he just handed me the tablet without saying a word. His hand was shaking. I looked at the screen, zoomed in on the woman standing next to Uncle Ron. She was maybe in her late 40s, dark hair pulled back, wearing a simple dress. She looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place her. And then Derek said, in this hollow voice that I'll never forget, "That's my mum." I stared at him. "What?" "That's my mum," he repeated, louder this time. "That's my mother." Derek's mom had died when he was 3 years old. Car accident. Tragic, sudden, the kind of thing that reshapes a family forever. Uncle Ron had raised Derek as a single father, and from what I'd always heard, he'd done a great job. Derek had grown up well-adjusted, successful, close with his dad. The story of his mom's death was just part of their family history. Sad but settled. A closed chapter, except, apparently, it wasn't. Derek grabbed the tablet back and started scrolling frantically through the other photos, looking for more shots of her, and he found them. Not many, but enough. Her standing near the entrance, her in the parking lot talking to someone, her sitting alone at a table in the corner during cocktail hour. She'd been at the wedding, she was alive, and Uncle Ron knew. I watched Derek's entire world crumble in real time. He walked straight over to where Uncle Ron was standing, talking with some relatives, and he shoved the tablet in his face. "Who is this?" he demanded, voice shaking. Uncle Ron looked at the screen, and I swear, the man aged 10 years in 10 seconds. His face went pale, his mouth opened and closed like he was trying to find words that didn't exist, and Derek just kept pressing. "Who is she, Dad? Because she looks a hell of a lot like the woman in the pictures you told me was dead." People were starting to stare. The music was still playing, but conversations around us had gone quiet. Uncle Ron pulled Derek aside, tried to get him to lower his voice, but Derek wasn't having it. "Tell me right now, is that her? Is that my mother?" And Uncle Ron, to his credit or maybe his detriment, didn't lie. He just nodded. The fallout was immediate and nuclear. Derek lost it, started yelling, demanding to know how this was possible, why he'd been lied to his entire life, where she'd been, why she was here. Uncle Ron tried to explain, but his words were drowned out by Derek's anger and the growing crowd of family members who were now very much paying attention. My aunt, the bride, came rushing over, asking what was happening. Someone found the woman, Derek's mother, and brought her over. And that's when things went from bad to unhinged. Her name was Linda. She looked terrified, like she knew this confrontation was inevitable, but had hoped to avoid it for just a little longer. Derek stared at her, this stranger who was supposed to be dead, and asked her point blank why she left. She didn't have a good answer. Not really. She said she'd been young, overwhelmed, not ready to be a mother. She said she'd made a mistake, and by the time she realized it, too much time had passed. She said she'd wanted to come back, but Uncle Ron had told her it was better if she stayed away. That Derek had moved on, that reopening that wound would only hurt him. Derek turned to his dad. "You've been in contact with her this whole time?" Uncle Ron nodded again. And that's when he admitted the rest. He'd been sending her money, for years, monthly payments to keep her away, to keep her quiet, to maintain the lie that she was dead. He said he did it to protect Derek, to give him stability, to avoid the mess and confusion of a mother who'd abandoned him suddenly reappearing. And here's where it gets absurd. Someone, I think it was my older cousin who works in insurance, asked the question that made everything so much worse. "Ron, didn't you collect life insurance when she died?" The silence that followed was deafening. Uncle Ron's face confirmed it before he even spoke. Yes, he'd collected life insurance, a significant payout. He'd used it to help raise Derek, to pay for his education, to build the life they had. And he'd done it all while knowing Linda was alive and well. That's insurance fraud, like serious, go-to-jail insurance fraud. The wedding was effectively over. My aunt was in tears, not because of her ruined reception, but because her brother had just imploded in front of everyone. Derek was inconsolable, switching between rage and heartbreak every few seconds. Linda tried to approach him, to explain, to apologize, but he wanted nothing to do with her. He told her she was 20 years too late and walked out. Uncle Ron tried to follow him, but Derek told him not to, told him he needed space, told him he didn't know if he'd ever be able to forgive this. And honestly, I don't blame him. The guests started filtering out. The band packed up early. The photographer, to his credit, was mortified that his photos had caused this, but really, what was he supposed to do? Not take pictures? It wasn't his fault. It was just terrible cosmic timing. One background shot that happened to capture the right person at the right angle, and the entire carefully constructed lie came crashing down. I talked to Derek a few days later. He was still processing, still angry, still hurt. He'd agreed to meet with Linda, but only to get answers. He said he didn't think he'd ever have a relationship with her, not a real one, but he needed to understand what happened. Why she left, why she stayed away, whether she ever actually cared. As for Uncle Ron, he's in serious legal trouble. The insurance company launched an investigation, and it turns out faking someone's death and collecting on their life insurance is exactly as illegal as it sounds. He's facing potential fraud charges, possible jail time, and the complete destruction of his relationship with his son, all because he thought he was protecting Derek by lying. The thing is, I get what he was trying to do. In some twisted way, he thought he was being a good father. He thought keeping Derek from the pain of knowing his mother chose to leave was the right move. But lies like that don't stay buried forever. They always find a way to surface, and when they do, the damage is so much worse than if he'd just told the truth from the beginning. Derek's still working through it. He's in therapy now, trying to untangle 20 years of grief for a mother who wasn't actually dead, and anger at a father who let him believe she was. It's going to take a long time, maybe forever. Some wounds don't heal cleanly. My aunt's wedding photos are beautiful, by the way. She still got them all, kept the ones she wanted, framed a few for her house. But there's one shot that didn't make the album, the wide ceremony photo with Linda in the background. That one got deleted, not because it was a bad photo, but because it captured the moment right before everything fell apart. And sometimes you don't need a reminder of that frozen in time. One photo, 20 years of lies, all gone in an instant. Photos freeze moments in time, but sometimes what you find in a wallet reveals an entire life you never knew existed. My partner lost his wallet at the gym on a Wednesday. He called me in a panic, saying he'd left it in the locker room and couldn't find it anywhere. He was convinced someone had stolen it, already mentally cancelling credit cards and dreading the DMV trip. I told him to relax, that maybe someone turned it in. He seemed skeptical, but I offered to swing by the gym on my way home from work and check the front desk. No big deal, just being helpful. The guy at the front desk knew exactly what I was talking about. Someone had found it near the benches and dropped it off that morning. He handed it over, I thanked him, and I was about to leave when something made me open it. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe. Or just that instinct you get when something feels slightly off. The wallet was one of those old leather ones with the clear plastic sleeves for photos. You know the kind. And tucked into those sleeves were pictures, but they weren't pictures of us. They weren't pictures of his parents or his friends or even his dog. They were pictures of him with 2 young kids, maybe 5 and 7 years old, and a woman I'd never seen before. All 4 of them were at a beach, smiling, looking like the definition of a happy family. I stood there in the gym parking lot, staring at these photos, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. Maybe they were nieces and nephews. Maybe the woman was his sister. But something about the way he had his arm around her, the way the kids were leaning into him, told me that wasn't it. This wasn't a casual family photo. This was his family. I drove straight to his place, didn't call ahead, didn't text, just showed up, walked in, and put the wallet on the kitchen table in front of him. "Want to explain these?" I said, flipping it open to the photos. The look on his face told me everything I needed to know. He went pale, then red. Then he just deflated, like all the air had been sucked out of him. He didn't try to lie. He didn't scramble for an excuse. He just sat down and put his head in his hands. "I was going to tell you," he said, which is the most cliché opening line to a confession I've ever heard. "Tell me what?" I asked, even though I already knew. He took a breath. Then he told me he'd been married, had 2 kids, got divorced 4 years ago. His ex-wife had full custody, and he hadn't seen the kids in over 3 years. By choice. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. We'd been together for almost 2 years. 2 years. And not once had he mentioned he had children. Not once had he said he'd been married. I told him everything about my past, my family, my life, and he'd just casually omitted the fact that he was a father. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Because I wanted a fresh start," he said, and I swear I almost laughed at how absurd that sounded. After the divorce, everything fell apart. I lost the house, I lost custody, I was broken, depressed, and I just wanted to move on. When I met you, it felt like a chance to start over. I didn't want to drag all that baggage into something new. Baggage. He called his children baggage. "They're your kids," I said. "How do you just walk away from your kids?" He didn't have a good answer for that. He said the divorce was messy, that his ex-wife made it impossible for him to see them, that every visit turned into a fight. He said it was easier for everyone if he just stepped back. He convinced himself they were better off without him. He paid child support, he said, like that made it okay. Like throwing money at the problem absolved him of actually being a father. I sat there listening to him, and with every word I felt more and more disgusted, not just because he'd lied to me, but because of what the lie revealed. This man had 2 children who existed in the world, and he'd chosen to pretend they didn't. He'd erased them from his life because it was convenient, because it was easier. And here's where it gets absurd. I asked him why he still had their photos in his wallet if he was so committed to this fresh start. If he'd really moved on, why carry around pictures of a family he'd abandoned? He didn't have an answer for that either. He just stared at the wallet like it had betrayed him. I think that's what gutted me the most. He hadn't even fully committed to his own lie. Part of him still held onto those photos, still carried them around every day. But another part of him had decided those people didn't deserve to be mentioned. He wanted it both ways. He wanted to keep the memory but avoid the responsibility. I asked him if he ever thought about them. His kids, if he wondered how they were doing, if they remembered him, if they asked about him. He said he tried not to. He said it was too painful, and I realized in that moment that his pain was the only pain that mattered to him, not theirs, not the confusion and abandonment those kids must have felt when their dad just stopped showing up, just his. That's when everything unraveled. I told him I couldn't do this. I couldn't be with someone who was capable of walking away from his own children. Because if he could do that to them, what was stopping him from doing it to me? What happened when things got hard between us? When life got messy, would he just decide I was too much baggage too and disappear? He tried to argue. He said it wasn't the same, that what we had was different, that he loved me. But love doesn't mean anything when it's conditional, and his love was clearly conditional. It existed only as long as things were easy. I left that night, packed up the few things I had at his place, gave him back his key, and walked out. He didn't try to stop me. Maybe he knew there was nothing he could say that would fix it. Or maybe, deep down, he was relieved. One less person to disappoint. I found out later through a mutual friend that his ex-wife had tried for years to get him involved in the kids' lives. She'd offered him visitation. She'd invited him to birthdays and school events. He'd turned it all down. It wasn't that she made it impossible. It was that he didn't want to put in the effort. He wanted to be free of the mess, and his kids were part of that mess, so he cut them out. The whole thing still makes me feel sick when I think about it. Not just because he lied, but because of what those wallet photos represented. He loved those kids enough to keep their pictures, but not enough to actually be their father. And that contradiction, that gap between what he wanted to feel and what he was willing to do, told me everything I needed to know about who he was. You can't erase people because they're inconvenient. You can't start fresh by pretending entire chapters of your life didn't happen. And you definitely can't abandon your children and then act like you're the victim because it's hard to think about them. Those wallet photos showed me exactly who he really was. A man who could walk away from anyone when it suited him. And I wasn't about to wait around to become the next person he erased. Some people hide entire families, but what happens when every song on a private playlist tells a story you were never supposed to hear? I borrowed my girlfriend's phone to play music in the car. It was completely innocent. We were heading to dinner, my phone was dead, and she tossed me hers from the passenger seat and told me to pick something. I opened Spotify, started scrolling through her playlists, and that's when I saw it. A playlist I'd never noticed before, tucked at the bottom of her library. It was called What Could Have Been. I almost didn't click on it, but something about the name felt off, melancholic, personal. So I opened it and what I found made my stomach drop. Every single song was about lost love, missed chances, longing for someone who got away, the kind of playlist you make when you're stuck on someone you can't have. And in the description, just 2 words. For Jay. Jay. My brother's initial is J. His name is Jason. I didn't say anything right away. I just sat there staring at the screen while some acoustic heartbreak song played through the car speakers. My girlfriend was talking about something, I don't even remember what, and I was trying to process what I was looking at. Why would she have a playlist dedicated to my brother? I started scrolling through her phone. I know that's a violation of privacy. I know I shouldn't have. But in that moment, I needed to know if what I was thinking was actually possible or if I was losing my mind. And that's when I found the messages. Old ones, buried deep in a folder she'd archived but never deleted. Messages between her and Jason from 5 years ago. They dated, seriously dated, for almost a year, and I had no idea. The messages were everything you'd expect from a relationship that ended badly. Her begging him not to leave, him saying he had to take the job abroad, that it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, her saying she'd wait, him saying he couldn't ask her to do that, and then nothing. He left. She stayed. And apparently she never got over it. I pulled the car over, told her we needed to talk. She looked confused at first, and then she saw her phone in my hand, saw the playlist still open, and her face went white. Why do you have a playlist dedicated to my brother? I asked, keeping my voice as calm as I could. She didn't answer right away. Just stared out the windshield like she was trying to figure out how to explain something that didn't have a good explanation. And then, finally, she admitted it. She and Jason had dated 5 years ago, before I ever met her. He'd broken her heart when he moved to London for work. She'd been devastated, and when she met me 2 years later at a mutual friend's party, she realized I was his brother. At first, she said it was just a coincidence, but then she started thinking that maybe it was fate, maybe being close to my family, being part of our lives, would keep her connected to him. And maybe, eventually, he'd come back and they'd get another chance. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. So you started dating me to stay close to him? She tried to backtrack, said it wasn't like that she'd genuinely developed feelings for me, that over time I became more than just a connection to Jason. But I could hear the hesitation in her voice, the uncertainty, and I knew deep down that even if she did love me now, I'd started as a placeholder, a way to keep herself in orbit around the person she actually wanted. And here's where it gets absurd. I asked her if she'd ever planned to tell me. She said she didn't think it mattered, that it was ancient history, that Jason had moved on, and so had she, and bringing it up would only complicate things. But she hadn't moved on. She'd made a playlist. She'd kept the messages. She'd built a shrine to a relationship that ended half a decade ago, and I'd been walking around completely oblivious. I asked if Jason knew, if he had any idea she'd been holding on to this. She shook her head, said they hadn't spoken in years, that he probably didn't even remember her, and that just made it worse. He'd forgotten. He'd moved on completely, but she was still here, curating playlists and dating his brother because she couldn't let go. I called Jason that night, not to confront him, just to confirm the story. He was confused at first when I brought up her name, and then he remembered. Oh yeah, we dated for a bit before I moved. Why? I told him I'd been seeing her for the past year and a half. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Wait, you're dating her? My ex? He said, and I could hear the disbelief in his voice. Did she know you were my brother when you got together? Yeah, I said. She knew. Another silence, then he said, That's weird, man. That's really weird. He wasn't wrong. This is where patience finally snapped. I ended things with her the next day. She tried to convince me that her feelings for me were real, that she'd genuinely fallen for me over time, that the playlist was just nostalgia, not current feelings. But I couldn't believe her. How could I? Every song on that playlist told a different story. Every message she'd kept told me she'd never really let him go, and I wasn't about to spend the rest of my life wondering if I was just a consolation prize. She cried, said I was being unfair, that people have pasts, that it wasn't her fault she'd dated Jason before she met me. And she was right to an extent. She couldn't control who she'd been with before, but she could control the fact that she'd hidden it. She could control the fact that she'd kept a playlist dedicated to him while she was with me. She could control the fact that she'd started our relationship with an agenda. I asked her, point blank, if she would have been with me if I wasn't Jason's brother. If we'd met under completely different circumstances, with no connection to him, would she have given me a chance? She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. She finally deleted the playlist, sent me a screenshot to prove it, like that would change anything. But deleting a playlist doesn't erase the fact that it existed. It doesn't undo the months I spent thinking we had something real when, for her, I might have just been a way to stay connected to someone else. Jason felt terrible when I told him the full story. He said he had no idea she'd felt that strongly about him, that their relationship had been casual from his perspective, that he'd moved on the second he got on the plane to London. He offered to talk to her, to clear things up, but I told him not to. It wasn't his mess to clean up. This was between me and her, and honestly, there was nothing left to say. I still think about it sometimes, about whether she ever really loved me, or if I was just convenient, a placeholder, a way to fill the space until the person she actually wanted came back. And the worst part is, I'll never really know. She says she loved me. She says I became more important to her than Jason ever was. But words are easy. Playlists, messages, and hidden truths, those tell a different story. I don't hate her. I just feel sorry for her. 5 years is a long time to carry a torch for someone who's moved on. And it's an even longer time to let that torch burn while you're trying to build something new with someone else. She was never fully present in our relationship because part of her was always stuck in the past. And I deserved better than that. Everyone does. Playlists can haunt you, but nothing compares to when an apology video meant for damage control ends up causing even more destruction. I thought I'd seen the last of my ex when I made that post calling out his cheating. It wasn't even that dramatic. I just laid out the facts, said my piece, and moved on. But apparently, he couldn't handle the idea of people knowing what he'd actually done. So 2 days later, he posted an apology video. The video was everything you'd expect. Dim lighting for that moody, contemplative vibe. He was sitting on his couch looking all sad and reflective, talking about how he'd made mistakes and hurt someone he cared about. He said he was working on himself, going to therapy, becoming a better person. The whole performance was so rehearsed it could have been an audition tape. He even had the nerve to say he hoped I could forgive him someday, and that he took full responsibility for his actions. I watched it once, rolled my eyes, and moved on with my day. I figured it was just his way of trying to salvage his image. He had a decent social media following, some small sponsorships, and he was clearly worried about how this would affect his brand. The apology wasn't for me, it was damage control. But then the comments started rolling in, and they weren't the supportive, "we all make mistakes" comments he was probably hoping for. People were pointing out something I'd completely missed, something he'd definitely missed. In the window behind him, you could see a reflection, and in that reflection, clear as day, was a woman sitting on the other end of his couch, in her underwear, scrolling through her phone like she was waiting for him to finish filming. The internet detectives went to work immediately. Screenshots started circulating within the hour. People were zooming in, enhancing the image, comparing it to photos of his mistress from her own social media. It was definitely her, no question. And there she was, just casually hanging out half-dressed in the background, while he filmed his tearful apology about how sorry he was and how much he was working on himself. The irony was almost poetic. The comments section absolutely tore him apart. People were calling him every name in the book. They were making memes. Someone even set the reflection to dramatic music and posted it as a separate video that got more views than his original apology. It was brutal, and I'm not going to lie, I enjoyed every second of it. But that wasn't even the worst part. His mistress saw the video, saw the comments, saw herself in the reflection, and she was not happy. Turns out he'd been lying to her too. He'd told her that I was his crazy ex-girlfriend who wouldn't leave him alone, that we'd broken up months ago, and I was just bitter and trying to ruin his life. She had no idea we'd only been broken up for 2 weeks. She had no idea he'd been with both of us right up until I found out and left. So she posted her own video, a response, and let me tell you, she did not hold back. She laid out the entire timeline, showed text messages where he'd called me unstable, showed screenshots of him telling her he loved her while I was still living with him. She said she felt used and manipulated, that she never would have gotten involved if she'd known the truth. And she ended the video by saying she was done with him and that he clearly hadn't changed at all. Her video went viral too, even bigger than his. People were sharing it everywhere, stitching it, reacting to it. The whole thing became this massive internet drama, and my ex was at the center of it, looking like the worst kind of liar. And here's where it gets absurd. His sponsors started dropping him. He had a few small brand deals, nothing huge, but enough that he was making some money off his social media presence. They all pulled out within days. One of them even posted a statement saying they don't work with people who don't align with their values. The internet ate that up too. Then his job found out. He worked for some tech startup that prided itself on being progressive and ethical, and apparently becoming a viral meme for being a cheating liar didn't fit their image. They let him go, cited some vague reason about conduct, but everyone knew why. His entire life just unraveled because he forgot to check what was visible in a window reflection. One careless mistake in a video he probably spent hours planning and rehearsing, and it all came crashing down. The memes kept coming for weeks. People were using his video as a template, editing in their own reflections, making jokes. It became this whole thing, and every time a new version popped up, it just reminded everyone what he'd done. He couldn't escape it. He tried deleting the original video, but by then it had been downloaded and re-uploaded so many times that it didn't matter. The internet had archived his downfall. I didn't have to do anything. I didn't respond to his apology. I didn't make a statement. I didn't even comment on any of the posts. I just watched it all happen from a distance while eating popcorn and occasionally sending screenshots to my friends. The best part? He tried to post another apology, a second one, addressing the reflection and the backlash. But by that point, nobody cared what he had to say. The comments were just more jokes and mockery. He'd burned whatever credibility he had left. People don't forgive you when you apologize for getting caught lying in your apology. His mistress and I never spoke directly, but I did see that she'd liked one of my posts a few weeks later. A small gesture, but it felt like this silent acknowledgement that we'd both been played by the same person. She moved on, I moved on, and he was left to deal with the consequences of his own stupidity. I think about that video sometimes, how he must have sat there, probably running through it multiple times, making sure he sounded sincere, making sure the lighting was right, making sure every word landed the way he wanted, and he missed the one thing that mattered: the reflection, the evidence, the truth sitting right there in the frame the entire time. It's almost like the universe has a sense of humor. He wanted to control the narrative, and instead, he handed everyone the proof they needed to see exactly who he really was. No filter, no edits, just the raw, uncut reality of a guy who thought he could apologize his way out of accountability while his side piece sat on his couch in the background. His attempt at redemption became his complete public downfall, and I didn't even have to lift a finger. The internet did all the work for me, and honestly, I couldn't have planned it better if I tried. Public apologies can backfire spectacularly, but private family donations can hide even darker secrets, as one mom's charity habit proved. My dad died last year after a short battle with cancer. It was sudden, devastating, and it left my mom and me trying to piece together the logistics of a life that had just ended: estate stuff, legal paperwork, bank accounts, all the administrative chaos that comes with losing someone you love. I was helping my mum go through the finances, making sure bills were being paid, checking which accounts needed to be closed, when I noticed something odd. There were monthly transfers from her checking account, always the same amount, $2,000 every single month, going back 15 years. The transfers were labeled as charity donations. My mum had always been generous, always involved in causes she cared about, so at first I didn't think much of it. But $2,000 a month for 15 years is over $360,000. That's not casual charity. That's a second mortgage. I asked her about it, casually at first. "Hey mum, what charity is this going to? I want to make sure we update the records." She brushed me off, said it was just a cause she supported and she'd handle it. But something in her tone felt wrong, defensive, like I'd stepped on a landmine she'd been carefully avoiding for years. So I dug deeper. I pulled the account information for the recipient. It wasn't a registered charity. It wasn't a non-profit. It was a personal checking account, belonging to a woman named Linda Graves. I didn't recognize the name. I asked my mum again, more directly this time, who Linda Graves was and why she'd been sending her $2,000 a month for over a decade. My mum went pale, told me to drop it, said it was complicated and not something I needed to worry about. But I was already worried, because people don't pay someone that much money for that long unless there's a reason, a big one. I hired a private investigator. I know that sounds dramatic, but at that point I needed answers, and my mum clearly wasn't going to give them to me. It took the investigator less than a week to piece together the story. Linda Graves was my dad's ex-girlfriend. They dated seriously before he met my mum, and at some point during or right after their relationship, Linda got pregnant. My dad was the father, but instead of stepping up, instead of being involved, he and my mum, who he'd just started dating at the time, made a deal with Linda. They would pay her a lot, every month, for as long as it took, and in exchange, she would stay away. She wouldn't contact them. She wouldn't tell anyone. She'd raise the kid on her own and let my dad live his life like it never happened. I have a half-sibling. A half-sister, actually. She's 32 years old, and I had no idea she existed. My mum finally admitted it when I confronted her with the investigator's report. She broke down crying, said they were young and scared and didn't know what else to do. My dad didn't want to be a father to Linda's baby. He wanted to be with my mum, and my mum, for reasons I still don't fully understand, agreed to go along with it. They got married, had me a few years later, and just kept paying Linda every month like clockwork. Guilt money, hush money, whatever you want to call it. I asked my mum if she ever felt bad about it, if she ever thought about that kid growing up without a father because my dad chose us over her. She said of course she did. She said it haunted her. But she also said my dad was a good man, that he provided for us, that he made a mistake and spent the rest of his life trying to make up for it financially. As if money could replace a parent. But that wasn't even the worst part. I found out Linda had tried to reach out, multiple times over the years, not to ask for more money, just to let my dad know how his daughter was doing, to send pictures, to offer him a chance to be involved, even minimally. And every single time, my parents shut her down, told her the deal was the deal, told her they'd keep paying as long as she kept her distance. And she did, because she needed the money, because raising a kid alone is expensive, and my dad had made it clear that financial support was all she was ever going to get from him. I decided to reach out to my half-sister. I didn't tell my mom I was going to do it. I knew she'd try to stop me, and honestly, I didn't care anymore. This woman was my sister. I had a right to know her, and she had a right to know that someone in this family actually acknowledged she existed. I found her on social media, sent her a message explaining who I was, that I'd just found out about her, and that I wanted to talk if she was open to it. She responded 2 days later, and what she said broke my heart. She didn't want anything to do with me. She said our dad had abandoned her emotionally and financially threw money at the problem to ease his conscience. She said she'd grown up knowing she had a father who didn't want her, and that the only reason she existed comfortably was because he paid her mum to keep quiet. She said she didn't need another reminder of the family that chose to pretend she didn't exist. I tried to explain that I didn't know, that I'd just found out, that I wanted to make things right, or at least try. But she wasn't interested. She told me the money had stopped when my dad died, which was expected, but that she was fine. She had a life, a career, people who actually cared about her, and she didn't need someone showing up out of guilt trying to play sibling now that the checks had stopped coming. I couldn't blame her. I really couldn't. From her perspective, I was just another piece of the family that had excluded her for 30 years. It didn't matter that I didn't know. It didn't matter that I wanted to reach out. The damage was already done. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. My mum begged me to stop trying to contact her, said I was opening old wounds, making things worse, that Linda and her daughter had moved on, and I needed to let them. But I couldn't let it go, because this wasn't just about them. It was about me, too. My entire life had been built on a lie. My dad wasn't the man I thought he was. He wasn't just a good father to me. He was also a father who abandoned another child because it was inconvenient, and my mom had enabled it. For 30 years, she'd signed those checks, transferred that money, and pretended like it was charity, like it was something noble. But it wasn't charity, it was guilt, and it was payment for silence. I stopped speaking to my mum for a while after that. I needed space, needed time to process the fact that my parents had built our family on the foundation of someone else's exclusion. That every happy memory I had, every family vacation, every birthday existed because my dad had chosen me over my half-sister. And my mom had been okay with that. The payments have stopped now, obviously. My dad's gone. The estate's been settled, and I don't know what Linda and her daughter are doing, but I hope they're okay. I hope they found peace, or at least some version of it. As for me, I'm still trying to reconcile the man I thought my dad was with the man he actually turned out to be. And I'm trying to forgive my mom, but I don't know if I can. Because every time I think about those 15 years of transfers, I don't see charity. I see a cover-up. I see two people who chose their own comfort over doing the right thing. Guilt money can buy silence, but it can't buy back trust, especially when your spouse's diary reveals a betrayal hidden in plain sight. I found my husband's journal by accident. I wasn't snooping, wasn't looking for anything. I was cleaning out the closet, reorganizing shelves, and it fell out from behind a stack of old sweaters, a plain black notebook, the kind you'd buy at any drugstore. I almost put it back without opening it, but something stopped me. Maybe curiosity, maybe instinct. Either way, I opened it. The first entry was dated about a year ago. Nothing alarming at first, just thoughts about work, stress, the usual mundane stuff. But then I saw her name, Sarah, my best friend, and not just mentioned in passing. He'd written an entire paragraph about her, about how she'd looked at our barbecue that weekend, how the sunlight caught her hair, how her laugh made him feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. I kept reading. I know I shouldn't have, but I couldn't stop. Page after page, entry after entry, all about Sarah. How beautiful she was, how easy she was to talk to. How he found himself thinking about her when he should have been thinking about work, about me, about our life together. He wrote about fantasies, Not graphic, not sexual, but emotional. He imagined what it would be like to wake up next to her, to build a life with her, to start over with someone who made him feel alive again. He'd never physically cheated. There was nothing in the journal about secret meetings or physical affairs. But emotionally, he'd checked out of our marriage months ago, and he'd been documenting it the entire time. I sat on the floor of that closet for what felt like hours, just reading. My hands were shaking. My chest felt tight. Every word was like a knife, because this wasn't just some passing crush. This was sustained, detailed, obsessive. He'd been in love with my best friend for over a year, and I'd had no idea. When he got home that night, I was sitting at the kitchen table with the journal open in front of me. He walked in, saw it, and stopped dead in his tracks. The color drained from his face. "I can explain," he said, which is possibly the worst thing you can say when your spouse finds a year's worth of diary entries about being in love with someone else. "Explain what?" I asked, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "Explain how you've been writing love letters to my best friend while I've been sitting right here?" He didn't deny it, didn't try to say it wasn't what it looked like. He just stood there, looking guilty and caught and pathetic. Then he said he'd been trying to work through his feelings by writing instead of acting on them. Like that made it better. Like putting his obsession on paper instead of pursuing it in real life earned him some kind of moral credit. I asked him if Sarah knew, if she had any idea he'd been harboring these feelings. He shook his head, said he'd never told her, never made a move, never crossed that line, and I almost laughed because he thought the line was physical. He thought as long as he didn't touch her, didn't kiss her, didn't sleep with her, he wasn't betraying me. But betrayal isn't just physical. He'd been emotionally unfaithful for a year. He'd been fantasizing about a life with someone else while going through the motions with me. I called Sarah right then, put her on speaker, told her she needed to hear something, and started reading excerpts from the journal out loud. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard her voice, shaky and horrified. "What the hell is this?" she said. I told her it was my husband's diary, that he'd been writing about her for months, that he was in love with her. Her response was immediate and visceral. She said she felt sick, said she'd had no idea, that she'd never done anything to encourage this, never thought of him that way, never even considered the possibility. She felt violated, like he'd been watching her, studying her, building this entire fantasy without her knowledge or consent. She told me she was so sorry, that she never wanted to be part of something like this, and then she said she needed to go, needed time to process. I haven't heard from her since. She cut contact with both of us, blocked my husband immediately, and distanced herself from me too. I don't blame her. She didn't ask to be the subject of someone's obsession, and being around me probably just reminded her of the whole mess. My husband begged for a chance to fix things, said he'd go to therapy, said he'd do whatever it took, that the feelings were fading, that he'd been working through them, that writing about it was his way of letting it go, but I couldn't get past it. How do you come back from that? How do you rebuild trust with someone who spent a year filling pages with fantasies about your best friend? And here's where it gets absurd. I asked him when he was planning to tell me, if he ever was, or if he was just going to keep writing in his little journal, pining after Sarah, while I walked around completely oblivious. He didn't have an answer, said he didn't know, that he thought maybe the feelings would just go away on their own if he didn't feed them. But he did feed them. Every time he wrote about her, every time he detailed how she made him feel, he was feeding those feelings, nurturing them, keeping them alive, and all the while I was right there, trying to keep our marriage together, wondering why he felt so distant, why conversations felt strained, why he seemed checked out. Turns out, he was checked out, just not in the way I'd imagined. Things went from bad to unhinged when I found out he'd been rereading old entries. There were notes in the margins, updates, reflections on earlier thoughts. He wasn't just writing to process, he was curating, building a narrative, almost like he was writing a story where he was the tortured protagonist in love with someone he couldn't have. It was self-indulgent and cruel, and I couldn't stand to look at him anymore. I filed for divorce 2 weeks later. He tried to fight it at first, tried to convince me that nothing had actually happened, that it was all in his head, that we could move past this, but I was done. You don't move past something like this. You don't just forgive someone for emotionally replacing you with your best friend and documenting the whole thing like it was some tragic romance novel. The divorce went through quickly. No kids, no major assets to fight over. Just a clean break. He kept the house, I kept my dignity, and he kept his diary for all the good it will do him. I ran into Sarah a few months later. It was awkward. She apologized again, even though she had nothing to apologize for. Said she still felt weird about the whole thing. I told her I understood, that I didn't blame her, that none of it was her fault. We haven't reconnected. I think too much damage was done, not by anything she did, but by the situation itself. Our friendship became collateral damage in my husband's fantasy, and there's no real way to recover from that. I think about that journal sometimes, about how he filled it with thoughts about someone else while I was lying next to him every night, about how he looked me in the eye every day and pretended everything was fine while pouring his real feelings onto those pages. It's one thing to develop feelings for someone else. That happens. People are human. But to nurture those feelings, document them, romanticize them, all while staying in a marriage you've already mentally left, that's a choice. A deliberate, selfish choice. He made his choice. And I made mine. Diaries expose inner thoughts, but sometimes it's a sister's slip of the tongue that brings an entire double life crashing down. Our engagement party was supposed to be perfect. My fiancé's family had flown in from out of state, my friends were all there, and we'd rented this beautiful venue with string lights and a live band. Everything felt like it was falling into place. I was genuinely happy, excited for the future, ready to start this new chapter. And then my future sister-in-law had one too many glasses of wine. We were standing by the bar, chatting about wedding plans, and she got this sentimental look on her face. She grabbed my hand and said, "I'm just so glad he finally picked you over Rachel." I blinked. "Who's Rachel?" The second the words left my mouth, I watched her face go from tipsy and warm to stone-cold sober in about half a second. She realized what she'd just said. Her eyes went wide and she immediately started backtracking. "Oh, nobody, just an old friend. I don't know why I said that." But I wasn't letting it go. Something about the way she said it, the way her whole body tensed up, told me this wasn't just some offhand comment. "No, seriously, who's Rachel?" She looked around like she was hoping someone would come rescue her, but we were alone at the bar. Finally, she sighed and said, "You should ask him." That was all I needed to hear. I found my fiancé in the crowd, pulled him aside, and asked him point blank, "Who's Rachel?" He went pale, like all the color just drained out of his face. He stammered something about her being an ex, that it was a long time ago, that it didn't matter. But I could tell he was lying, or at least not telling me the whole truth. So I went back to his sister and told her I wasn't letting this go until someone gave me a real answer. She looked miserable, guilty, but she also looked like she knew this conversation was inevitable. So she told me. Rachel was my fiancé's ex, but she wasn't just an ex, she was his fiancée. 2 years ago, he'd proposed to her. They'd been planning a wedding. His whole family had met her, loved her. They'd done engagement photos, picked a venue, sent save the dates, and then, out of nowhere, he disappeared. Didn't call off the engagement, didn't have a conversation, just ghosted her, packed his stuff, moved to a different city, and started over. With me, I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. He was engaged, and he just left? She nodded, looking like she wanted to crawl into a hole. We all thought he'd eventually reach out to her and explain, but he never did. He just moved on, and when he started dating you, we figured he'd learned from his mistakes, that he was ready this time. I was shaking, furious, humiliated. I'd been with this man for a year and a half. We were planning a life together, and he'd never once mentioned that he'd done this exact same thing before and bailed. I walked back into the party, found him talking to some of my cousins, and asked him to step outside. He knew something was wrong. I could see it in his face. And when we got outside, I didn't even give him a chance to ease into it. I just said, "Tell me about Rachel." He tried to play dumb at first, said he didn't know what I was talking about. But I told him his sister had already spilled everything, and he needed to come clean right now or I was walking. That's when he finally admitted it. Said yes, he'd been engaged to Rachel. Yes, he'd left without explanation. But he tried to spin it like he was the victim. He said she was toxic, that the relationship was suffocating him, that he had to escape for his own mental health, and he didn't know how to do it without causing a scene, so he just left. I stared at him. You didn't know how to break up with someone like an adult, so you just vanished? He got defensive, said I didn't understand what it was like, that I wasn't there, that Rachel had issues he couldn't deal with. But even as he said it, I could tell he didn't believe his own excuse. He was just scrambling for something that would make him sound less awful. And here's where it gets absurd. His sister found me later that night after I'd called off the party and told everyone to go home. She pulled me aside, tears in her eyes, and said she needed to tell me the truth, that what he'd said about Rachel being toxic was a lie. Rachel had been wonderful, kind, patient, excited to marry him, and he'd gotten cold feet and run. That was it. No dramatic fights, no toxicity. Just a guy who panicked and decided it was easier to disappear than to have an uncomfortable conversation. She said the family had been furious with him, that they'd tried to get him to reach out to Rachel, to at least give her closure, but he refused. He said he wanted a fresh start, and when he moved and met me, they all hoped he'd changed, that he'd grown up, but clearly he hadn't. I asked her for Rachel's contact information. She hesitated, but eventually gave it to me. Said Rachel deserved to know that someone finally cared enough to check on her. I reached out to Rachel the next day, sent her a message explaining who I was, what had happened, and that I was sorry. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe anger, maybe indifference, but what I got was heartbreak. She responded right away, said she'd spent 2 years wondering what she did wrong, wondering if she'd missed some sign that he was unhappy. She'd gone to therapy. She'd blamed herself, and the whole time he'd just been living his life in another city, pretending she never existed. She told me she'd tried to get closure. She'd called him, texted him, even showed up at his parents' house once. But he'd blocked her on everything, and his family had told her he needed space. She eventually gave up, assumed he'd moved on, and she needed to do the same. But she never really got over it. How could she? The person she was supposed to marry just erased her. Talking to her broke something in me, because I realized that could have been me. If I'd married him, if things got hard, if he decided he didn't want to deal with it anymore, he'd just leave. No conversation, no closure. Just gone. I ended the engagement that week, told him I couldn't be with someone who thought running away was an acceptable way to handle conflict. He tried to apologize, said he'd changed, said he loved me and would never do that to me. But I didn't believe him, because he'd said the same things to Rachel, and look how that turned out. His sister apologized profusely, said she should have told me sooner, that she felt terrible for keeping it from me. I told her I appreciated her finally being honest, but that I couldn't stay in contact with her or anyone in that family. It wasn't her fault, but I needed a clean break. The worst part is how easily he moved on. I heard through mutual friends that he's already dating someone new, some woman he met a few months after I left, and I can't help but wonder if she knows, if he told her about Rachel, about me, or if he's just doing the same thing again, building a life on top of unfinished business and hoping it doesn't catch up to him. Rachel and I stayed in touch for a little while. She thanked me for reaching out, said it helped her finally let go of the guilt she'd been carrying. We're not close or anything, but knowing she got some closure made the whole disaster feel slightly less pointless. As for him, he's a coward, and his whole family enabled it by keeping quiet. They watched him do it once, and they were ready to let him do it again. And maybe he'll keep doing it. Maybe he'll keep starting over every time things get uncomfortable. But eventually, he's going to run out of cities to move to, and people willing to believe his excuses. I dodged a bullet, a big one, and I'm grateful his sister got drunk and let it slip, because if she hadn't, I might have actually married him. And that's a nightmare I don't even want to imagine. Engagement rings symbolize commitment, but what about when flowers arrive with a signature that shatters every vow? I was having a completely normal Tuesday when a bouquet of roses showed up at my door. Beautiful arrangement, expensive looking, the kind of flowers you send when you're trying to make a statement. I opened the card expecting something sweet from my boyfriend, and instead read, "From your real love." My first thought was that it was some kind of inside joke I wasn't getting. My boyfriend has a weird sense of humor sometimes, so I texted him a photo, said thanks for the flowers, asked what the cryptic message was about. He responded immediately, confused, said he didn't send any flowers, had no idea what I was talking about. I stared at the bouquet sitting on my kitchen counter, and this uncomfortable feeling started creeping up my spine. If my boyfriend didn't send them, who did? I checked the receipt that came with the delivery, and that's when I saw the name on the credit card. My brother-in-law, James. My sister's husband. I felt sick. Why would James send me flowers? Why would he sign the card like that? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe he ordered flowers for my sister, and they got delivered to the wrong address with the wrong card. But the address was correct. My apartment. My name on the delivery form. This wasn't an accident. I called him. Didn't even wait to think it through. Just called and asked him point blank what the hell he was thinking. There was silence on the other end, long enough that I thought he'd hung up, and then he started talking, and I wished he had hung up. He said he'd been in love with me for years, since before he married my sister. He said he'd always felt this connection with me, that I understood him in a way she didn't, that he'd made a mistake marrying her when it was me he really wanted. He said he'd been waiting for the right time to tell me, and he thought maybe now, after 5 years, I might feel the same way. I couldn't even speak. I was too shocked, too disgusted. This man had sat across from me at family dinners for half a decade. He'd been at my birthday parties, he'd helped me move apartments, and the entire time, he'd been harboring this delusion that we were supposed to be together, that he'd married my sister as some kind of backup plan. I told him he was out of his mind, told him I'd never felt anything for him, that I never would, and that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Then I hung up and immediately called my sister. She was at work when I reached her, and I could hear the confusion in her voice when I said I needed to talk to her about James. I told her everything. The flowers, the card, the phone call, his confession, and she went silent. The kind of silence that's worse than yelling. The kind where you know someone's entire world is collapsing and they're trying to hold it together. She didn't believe me at first. She said there had to be some kind of explanation, that James wouldn't do something like that, that maybe I misunderstood. So I sent her the receipt, sent her screenshots of his texts where he'd started apologizing, begging me not to tell her, saying it was just a moment of weakness and he didn't mean it. That's when everything unraveled. She left work early, went straight home and confronted him. I wasn't there for it, but she told me later that he tried to play it off as a misunderstanding, said the florist must have messed up the card, said he'd been sending flowers to a co-worker named something similar and the orders got mixed up, except my sister called the florist, and the florist confirmed that James had personally requested that exact message. From your real love. No mix-up, no mistake. He'd meant every word. She kicked him out that night, told him to pack a bag and leave, that she'd have the rest of his stuff sent to him later. He tried to explain, tried to say he loved her, that he'd just been confused, but she wasn't hearing it. She said if he'd really loved her, he wouldn't have spent their entire marriage pining after her sister. I felt horrible, not because I did anything wrong, but because my existence had somehow become the center of this man's delusion. He'd built this entire fantasy in his head, where I was the one he was supposed to be with, and he dragged my sister into a marriage that was based on proximity to me. She deserved so much better than that. But that wasn't even the worst part. Family dinners became a nightmare. My parents found out. My aunts and uncles found out. Everyone had an opinion. Some people blamed James entirely. Others, unbelievably, suggested I must have done something to encourage him, as if existing was encouragement, as if being polite at family gatherings was leading him on. It was absurd, but it was also exhausting having to defend myself against accusations that I'd somehow caused this. My sister filed for divorce within 2 weeks. She didn't want to drag it out, didn't want to spend months negotiating or trying to salvage something that had been broken from the start. She just wanted out. And honestly, I didn't blame her. How do you stay married to someone who just admitted they married you to be close to someone else? James tried reaching out to me a few more times. Apologetic texts, voicemails saying he understood if I hated him, but that his feelings were real and he couldn't help how he felt. I blocked him on everything, told my sister I was doing it so she'd know I wanted nothing to do with him. She appreciated it, but I could tell she was still hurting, still processing the fact that her husband had been living a lie their entire marriage. The family ostracized him completely. He wasn't invited to anything. Holidays, birthdays, nothing. My parents made it clear he wasn't welcome. And honestly, nobody argued. He'd crossed a line that you don't come back from. You don't marry someone while being in love with their sibling and then confess it years later like it's some romantic gesture. That's not love. That's selfish, delusional behavior that destroys lives. My sister's doing better now. She's moved on, started dating someone new, someone who actually sees her as his first choice. We talk about it sometimes, late at night when she needs to process, and she always comes back to the same question. How did she not see it? Were there signs she missed? Was he always like this? I tell her it's not her fault, that he was good at hiding it, that nobody could have predicted he'd do something this unhinged. But I know she still wonders, still replays moments in her head trying to find the cracks she missed. As for me, I threw the flowers away the same day they arrived, didn't even keep them for a day. They felt tainted, like keeping them would somehow validate what he'd done, and I've been extra careful about my relationships ever since, extra aware of boundaries, extra cautious about people's intentions. Those flowers destroyed a marriage and a family bond in one delivery. And the worst part is, James still doesn't seem to understand what he did wrong. Last I heard, he was telling people we'd had a connection, and things just got complicated, as if I had any part in his fantasy. Some people really do write their own downfall. They create problems that didn't exist, and then act surprised when everything falls apart. Love confessions can ruin families, but nothing hits harder than a grandmother's final letter revealing your mother has been lying your entire life. My grandma passed away 3 months ago. It wasn't unexpected. She was 91, had been sick for a while, and honestly, we were all just grateful she went peacefully. The funeral was small, quiet, everything she would have wanted. Afterwards, the family gathered at her house to go through her things, divide up belongings, all the sad logistical stuff that comes with losing someone. That's when the lawyer handed me an envelope. My name was written on the front in my grandma's shaky handwriting, and underneath it said, "Open alone." The lawyer said she'd left specific instructions. I wasn't supposed to read it in front of anyone, just me. I took it to my car, sat in the driveway, and opened it. Inside was a letter. 3 pages, handwritten, dated 2 weeks before she died, and the first line made my stomach drop. "I can't leave this world without telling you the truth about your mother." I read the whole thing twice, sitting there in that driveway, feeling like the ground was shifting under me. My grandma had written that my mum wasn't actually my mum, not biologically. My real mother, her daughter, had died giving birth to me, and the woman I'd called mum my entire life was actually my aunt, my mother's younger sister. She'd adopted me immediately after my birth mother died, raised me as her own, and the entire family had agreed to never tell me the truth. My aunt, who supposedly lived across the country, who I'd heard about but never met because she was busy or traveling or going through something, didn't exist. That was a cover story. A fiction they'd all maintained for 32 years to keep me from asking questions. Everyone knew, my grandma, my uncles, my cousins, everyone except me. I sat in that car for over an hour, just staring at the letter, trying to process what I'd just read. My entire life felt like a lie. My identity, my history, the stories I'd been told about my childhood, all of it had been built on a foundation of a deception. And my grandma, the woman I'd trusted more than almost anyone, had kept this from me until she literally couldn't anymore. I drove home in a daze, didn't tell anyone where I was going, just needed to be alone. But the more I sat with it, the angrier I got. Not just sad, angry. Because this wasn't some small family secret. This was my entire existence, and they'd all decided I didn't have a right to know. I confronted my mum 2 days later, showed up at her house unannounced, letter in hand, and asked her if it was true. She took one look at the envelope, saw my grandma's handwriting, and just crumpled. Started crying before I even said anything. That was all the confirmation I needed. She tried to explain, said she'd wanted to tell me so many times, that she'd rehearsed the conversation in her head 1,000 different ways, but could never find the right moment. She said when my birth mother died, the family was devastated, and she'd stepped in because she loved me and didn't want me to grow up without a mum. She said it started as temporary, just until they figured things out. But then days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and eventually it just became the reality. I was her daughter. And telling me the truth felt like it would only hurt me. But that wasn't even the worst part. I asked her about my birth mother, what she was like, how she died, basic things I should have known my entire life, and my mum, my aunt, whoever she is, could barely answer. She said my birth mother's name was Ellen, that she'd been 23 when she got pregnant, that the delivery had complications and she'd hemorrhaged. They couldn't save her. My mum said Ellen had been excited to be a mother, that she'd picked out my name, that she'd wanted me so badly, and then she was just gone. I asked if there were pictures. She said yes, but she'd put them away years ago because it was too painful to look at. She went upstairs and came back with a box. Inside were photos of a woman who looked almost exactly like me. Same eyes, same smile, same face shape. It was like looking at a version of myself I'd never met, and I felt this overwhelming grief for someone I never knew, but who was, apparently, the reason I existed. I asked why they lied. Why not just tell me the truth from the beginning? She said they thought it would be easier, that telling a child their real mom died and their aunt was raising them felt cruel. They wanted me to have a normal childhood, not one overshadowed by tragedy. So they just decided to rewrite the story, and everyone went along with it. I asked if my dad knew. He'd passed away when I was 12, so I couldn't exactly ask him. She nodded, said he knew everything, that he'd supported the decision, that he'd loved me like I was his own, and never saw a reason to complicate things by bringing up the past. So even my dad had lied to me. Everyone had, and here's where it gets absurd. I started asking other family members about it, my uncles, my cousins, people I'd grown up with, spent holidays with, trusted, and every single one of them admitted they knew. Some looked guilty, some tried to justify it, but they all knew, and not one of them ever thought to tell me. My cousin Sarah said she'd assumed I knew, and just didn't talk about it. My uncle Mike said he thought my mum would tell me when I was ready. Everyone had an excuse, but the reality was they'd all chosen to protect a lie instead of giving me the truth. I don't know how to move forward from this. I'm 32 years old, and I just found out my entire identity is built on a secret. My mum isn't my mum. My birth mother is someone I never got to meet. And my grandmother decided the best time to tell me was after she was dead, so I couldn't even confront her about it. I've barely spoken to my mum since that day. She keeps calling, texting, trying to explain, trying to make me understand why they did what they did, but I can't look at her the same way. Every time I see her, I think about all the times she could have told me and didn't, all the moments where the truth was right there, and she chose to keep lying. I don't even know what to call her anymore. She raised me. She was there for every scraped knee, every school event, every milestone. In every way that matters, she was my mom. But she's also the person who took away my right to know where I came from. And I don't know how to reconcile those two things. I found a picture of Ellen, my birth mother, and I keep it on my desk now. I look at it sometimes and wonder what kind of person she was, what she would have been like as a mom. If she would have told me the truth, I'll never know. And that's the part that hurts the most. My grandma thought she was doing me a favor by telling me the truth. She said in the letter that she couldn't die with the secret, that I deserved to know, that it wasn't fair to keep me in the dark. But honestly, I kind of wish she'd taken it to the grave, because now I'm stuck with a truth that's rewritten my entire life, and I don't know what to do with it. My relationship with my mom, with my family, with my own sense of self, it's all fractured now, and I don't know if it can be put back together. Grandma's truth ruined everything, and she's not even here to answer for it. Family lies can span generations, but workplace secrets, those explode in real time, especially when someone accidentally CCs the wrong person. My boss had been having an affair with our department coordinator for months, maybe longer. Everyone in the office knew. It was one of those open secrets where people would exchange knowing looks when they left meetings together, or took suspiciously long lunches at the same time. But nobody said anything. He was the boss. She was well liked, and frankly, it wasn't our business. We all just kept our heads down and pretended we didn't notice. Until the day he sent the email. It was a regular Tuesday morning. I was at my desk going through my inbox when I saw it. An email from my boss to the coordinator with the subject line, "This weekend." I wasn't even supposed to see it. None of us were. But he'd made a mistake. A catastrophic, career-ending mistake. He'd accidentally CC'd his wife. The email itself was exactly what you'd expect. Details about a romantic weekend getaway they had planned, a cabin upstate, wine, plans to finally have uninterrupted time together. It was intimate, explicit in a way that made it very clear this wasn't a work trip, and his wife's name was right there in the CC line, sitting alongside the coordinator's personal email. I stared at my screen, frozen, knowing that in about 30 seconds this was going to detonate, and it did. The reply all came almost immediately, from his wife. Just 5 words. "See you in divorce court." My entire body went cold. I looked around the office. Other people were staring at their screens with the same shocked expression. We'd all received the bounce back notification. We'd all seen the reply. And we all knew what was about to happen. Within 10 minutes, his wife had forwarded the email to HR, then to the executive team, then, apparently, to half the company directory, because my phone started buzzing with messages from people in other departments asking if this was real. By the time my boss realized what he'd done, it was too late. The email had spread like wildfire. There was no walking it back, no damage control, just the cold, hard reality that he'd just exposed his affair to his wife, his employer, and everyone he worked with in a single email thread. HR called him into a meeting before lunch. He walked in looking pale and didn't come back. We found out later that day that he'd been fired, not just for the affair, which technically wasn't against company policy, but for using company email to arrange personal matters and creating a hostile work environment. The executives wanted him gone, and they had all the justification they needed, but that wasn't even the worst part. His wife showed up at the office that afternoon. I don't know how she got past security, but suddenly she was just there, standing in the middle of our floor, looking for the coordinator. Someone must have pointed her out because his wife walked straight up to her desk and confronted her in front of everyone. It wasn't loud or dramatic in the way you'd expect. It was cold, controlled. His wife told the coordinator she hoped it was worth it, that she'd be hearing from her lawyer, that she'd make sure everyone in the industry knew exactly what kind of person she was. The coordinator just sat there, silent, face bright red, while the entire office watched. Then his wife left, didn't say another word, just turned and walked out, and the coordinator sat at her desk for maybe 5 more minutes before she grabbed her bag and quit on the spot. Didn't give notice, didn't talk to HR, just left and never came back. Within 48 hours, both of their marriages were over. His wife filed for divorce immediately. The coordinator's husband, who apparently found out through the office gossip chain, did the same. Their careers were tanked, and the story spread across our entire industry faster than I thought possible. People talk, especially when it's this messy. Within a week, I was hearing versions of the story from people at competing firms who'd somehow gotten all the details. The fallout was brutal. The coordinator couldn't find work anywhere in our field. Turns out having your affair exposed in a company-wide email scandal makes you pretty unemployable. My boss disappeared for a while, deleted his social media, stopped showing up to industry events, just vanished. I ran into him at a coffee shop a few months later. I almost didn't recognize him. He looked like he'd aged 10 years, disheveled, tired. He saw me, and for a second I thought he might say something, but he just looked away and walked out. He looked completely destroyed, and honestly, I felt a little bad for him, not because I thought he didn't deserve the consequences. He absolutely did, but because it was hard to watch someone's entire life fall apart over a single careless mistake. One misplaced CC. That's all it took. He could have had the affair, kept it quiet, maybe even gotten away with it indefinitely. But he got sloppy. Didn't double-check the recipient list, and that one moment of carelessness turned his life into rubble. And here's where it gets absurd. The company implemented a new email policy after that. Every outgoing message now has a 5-second delay where you can cancel it if you realize you made a mistake. They literally added a feature because of what happened. It became known internally as the boss clause, a permanent reminder of the day someone's affair got exposed because they didn't know how CC worked. I've never been more careful with email since. I quadruple check every recipient line. I never send anything personal from my work account, and I definitely never use reply all unless I'm absolutely sure I know who's on the thread, because I watched firsthand how one email can dismantle an entire life in minutes. People always say to be careful what you put in writing, but this was next level. It wasn't just that he documented the affair, it's that he sent the evidence directly to the one person who could destroy him. And she did, swiftly and completely. I don't know where he is now, Last I heard, he'd moved to a different state, was working some lower level job outside the industry. The coordinator, from what I've gathered through mutual connections, is in a similar situation. Both of them basically had to start over from scratch. New cities, new careers, new lives built on the ashes of the ones they burned down. Their spouses moved on. His wife remarried, actually. I saw it on social media. She looked happy. The coordinator's ex-husband seems to be doing fine too. It's almost poetic. The people who got hurt the most by the affair ended up being the ones who recovered the fastest. The whole thing was a masterclass in how quickly your life can unravel when you stop paying attention to details. My boss thought he was being discreet, thought he had it all under control. But control is an illusion, and all it takes is one wrong click, one careless moment, and everything you've built can come crashing down. I think about that email sometimes, about how normal that Tuesday started and how catastrophically it ended, about how my boss walked into the office that morning with a career, a marriage, and a future, and walked out with none of those things, all because he didn't check the CC line. It's a cautionary tale, one I'll never forget. Email mistakes can torch careers, but deliberate sabotage? That's when the gloves come off and evidence becomes a weapon. I've always believed in keeping your head down at work. Do your job, stay professional, don't get involved in office drama. But sometimes drama finds you anyway. And when it does, you have two choices. Let it bury you or bury it first. It started with an email from HR. They needed to speak with me about a complaint that had been filed. Anonymous, they said. Someone had accused me of creating a hostile work environment. I was stunned. I got along with almost everyone. I didn't yell, didn't micromanage, didn't play favorites. I just did my work and tried to help my team do theirs. So the idea that someone thought I was hostile? It didn't make sense. The HR meeting was uncomfortable. They asked questions about my interactions with coworkers, my management style, whether I'd had any conflicts recently. I answered honestly, said I couldn't think of anything that would warrant a complaint like this. They said they'd investigate and get back to me. I left that meeting feeling sick to my stomach, because even if the complaint was baseless, the accusation alone was enough to damage my reputation. Word spread fast. People started looking at me differently. Conversations would stop when I walked into a room. I could feel the judgment, the suspicion. And the worst part was, I had no idea who'd filed the complaint or why. HR wouldn't tell me. Anonymous complaints are protected, they said, for the safety of the person reporting. But I had a pretty good idea who it was. Jennifer, a coworker who'd been gunning for the promotion I got 3 months earlier. She'd been with the company longer, thought she deserved it more, and hadn't hidden her bitterness when I was chosen instead. Ever since, she'd been cold, short with me in meetings, passive-aggressive in emails, but I never thought she'd stoop to something like this. The investigation wrapped up 2 weeks later. HR found nothing, no evidence of hostility, no pattern of behavior, nothing to substantiate the complaint. They cleared me officially, sent an email to my manager saying the matter was closed. But the damage was done. People still looked at me like I'd done something wrong, like maybe HR just couldn't prove it. My reputation had taken a hit, and there was no taking it back. I was furious, not just because of the false accusation, but because whoever filed it had done it anonymously, knowing they'd face no consequences. They got to take a shot at me and walk away clean, and I was supposed to just move on and pretend it never happened. But here's the thing, I'm not someone who just moves on. I'd noticed something about Jennifer months ago, back before any of this started. She was always traveling for work, client meetings, conferences, site visits, and she was always expensing things, meals, hotels, transportation, normal stuff, except some of it didn't add up. I'd seen her expense a dinner in Chicago on a night I knew she was in the office because we'd been in the same meeting until 7. I'd seen her claim mileage for a trip she didn't take because the client meeting had been moved to a video call. Little things, inconsistencies. At the time, I didn't think much of it. People make mistakes on expense reports. Maybe she was just disorganized. But after the HR complaint, I went back and looked closer, and what I found was way worse than mistakes. She'd been padding her expense reports for months, claiming meals she didn't eat, hotels she didn't stay in, mileage for trips that never happened. She was good at it too, never claimed anything outrageous, just small amounts here and there that wouldn't raise red flags. But over 6 months, it added up to thousands of dollars. Money the company had paid her for expenses she never actually incurred. I took screenshots, saved receipts, cross-referenced dates with her calendar and email, built a case, and then I sat on it because I wanted to be sure. I wanted to know beyond any doubt that if I went after her, I'd hit the target. Then came the breaking point. A week after HR cleared me, Jennifer made a comment in a team meeting. Something about how it's important to maintain professionalism even when people make you uncomfortable. It was pointed. Everyone in the room knew she was talking about me. And she said it with this smug little smile, like she'd gotten away with something and wanted to rub it in. That's when I decided I was done playing nice. I sent the evidence to our CFO, anonymously, just like she'd filed her complaint against me. I didn't editorialize, didn't add commentary, just attached the screenshots, the receipts, the timeline, and let the facts speak for themselves. Then I waited. The audit was launched within 2 days. I wasn't involved, didn't know the details, but I could see the fallout happening in real time. Jennifer was called into meetings. Finance started reviewing all her past expense reports. Her manager got involved. And within a week, she was fired. Not just fired, walked out by security in the middle of the day. The company was pursuing legal action for fraud. She'd stolen from them, and they weren't letting it go. I heard through the office grapevine that she was facing potential criminal charges, depending on how the investigation went. She tried to call me, left a voicemail crying, saying she was sorry, that she'd made mistakes, that she was desperate and didn't know what to do. She didn't admit to filing the HR complaint, but she didn't have to. I knew, and she knew I knew. I didn't call her back, didn't respond. There was nothing to say. She'd tried to destroy my reputation with a lie, and I'd ended her career with the truth. That's not revenge, that's consequences. And here's where it gets absurd. Some people in the office thought I'd gone too far, that turning her in was vindictive, that I should have just let it go. But those same people had no problem when she filed a baseless complaint against me and let my reputation get dragged through the mud. Funny how that works. When someone tries to ruin you, you're supposed to take the high road. But when you defend yourself with facts, suddenly you're the bad guy. I don't see it that way. She committed fraud. She stole from the company. That's not a gray area. And if she hadn't tried to weaponize HR against me, maybe I would have never looked closer at her expense reports. Maybe I would have just let those inconsistencies slide. But she came for me first, and she should have made sure her own house was clean before she did. Her career is over. She's not getting hired anywhere in this industry after being fired for fraud, and depending on how the legal side shakes out, she might be dealing with this for years, all because she wanted a promotion she didn't get and decided to take me down instead of just moving on. I don't feel bad. I know I'm supposed to. I know people expect me to feel some kind of remorse or guilt, but I don't. She made her choices, and I made mine. The difference is my choices were based on facts. Hers were based on lies. Play dirty, get buried. That's the lesson here. And if she'd spent half as much energy doing her actual job as she did trying to sabotage mine, maybe she'd still have a career. Revenge in the workplace is surgical, but sometimes you're not even the target of an investigation until you find out you're the key witness. I got called into HR on a Thursday afternoon. No warning, just a calendar invite that said quick check-in with Linda from Human Resources. I figured it was routine, maybe something about benefits or a policy update. I wasn't worried. I walked into the conference room, and Linda was there with another HR rep I didn't recognize and someone from legal. That's when I knew this wasn't routine. My stomach dropped. I ran through everything I'd done recently, trying to figure out what I could have possibly messed up. Mr. Deadline said something wrong in a meeting. I had no idea. Linda gestured for me to sit down, and her face was serious but not angry, more concerned. She said, "We want to start by saying you're not in trouble. You haven't done anything wrong." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Okay. Then what's this about?" She exchanged a look with the legal rep, then said, "You're the subject of an investigation, not as the accused, as the victim." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" She explained that over the past few weeks, multiple employees had come forward with concerns about our senior VP, Mark. Concerns about his behavior toward me specifically. They said he'd been making inappropriate comments about my appearance, staring at me during meetings in a way that made people uncomfortable, sending me late-night Slack messages that seemed overly familiar, with emojis that didn't feel professional. I sat there, completely stunned. I had no idea what she was talking about. Mark had always been friendly, a little chatty maybe, but I'd never thought anything of it. He was a senior executive. I was just trying to do my job and stay on his good side. Linda slid a folder across the table. We've been building a case for a few weeks now. We wanted to make sure we had everything documented before we brought you in. I opened the folder and my hands started shaking. Inside were screenshots, Slack messages from Mark sent at 11 p.m., midnight, 1 in the morning. Messages that said things like, "Great work today," with a winking emoji. "You looked nice in that meeting," with a heart. "Hope you're having a good night," with another wink. I'd responded to most of them with a polite thanks or a thumbs up, not thinking anything of it. I thought he was just being nice, encouraging, but seeing them all compiled like this, one after another, it looked different. It looked intentional, calculated. Then they showed me the witness statements, co-workers who said they'd noticed Mark watching me, following me with his eyes across the room during presentations, lingering too long when he talked to me at my desk. One person said they'd seen him adjust his position in meetings just to have a better view of where I was sitting. I felt sick. How had I not noticed? How had I been so oblivious? But that wasn't even the worst part. They pulled up security footage from the parking garage, time-stamped over the past 2 months, and there he was, Mark, walking to his car, which was parked on a completely different level than mine, but then redirecting, following the same path I took, timing it so he'd be near my car when I was leaving. Sometimes he'd pretend to be on his phone, sometimes he'd just stand there, waiting, and then walk past like it was a coincidence. I watched the footage, and I remembered those moments. I remembered seeing him in the garage and thinking it was weird that we kept running into each other, but I'd chalked it up to coincidence. I'd even waved at him once, smiled, made small talk about traffic, and the whole time he'd been doing it on purpose. I felt so stupid, so violated. This man had been watching me, messaging me, positioning himself around me for months, and I just smiled and nodded like an idiot because I didn't want to seem rude or paranoid. Linda asked if I was okay. I wasn't. I felt like the floor had disappeared. She said they'd been gathering evidence because they wanted to make sure they had a solid case before taking action. They didn't want to tip him off or risk him retaliating. And now that they had everything, they were moving forward. Mark was fired that same day. I didn't see it happen. They escorted him out while I was still in the HR meeting. By the time I got back to my desk, his office was already being cleared out. People were whispering, asking what happened, but I didn't say anything. I just grabbed my stuff and left early. HR offered me counseling, paid sessions with a therapist who specializes in workplace harassment. I went to a few appointments and it helped, but it didn't change the fact that I couldn't walk into the office anymore without feeling like I was being watched. Every time someone looked at me for too long, I wondered if they knew, if they'd seen the footage, if they were judging me for not noticing sooner. And here's where it gets absurd. Mark tried to reach out, not directly, because HR had made it very clear he wasn't allowed to contact me, but he sent a message through a mutual connection, someone who didn't know the full story. The message said he was sorry if he made me uncomfortable, that it was never his intention, that he was just trying to be friendly and supportive, like it was all some big misunderstanding. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. His intention didn't matter. The impact did. And the impact was that I no longer felt safe in a place I'd worked for 3 years. I started job hunting a few weeks later. I didn't want to leave. I liked my team. I liked the work. But every day I walked into that building, I thought about him following me to my car. I thought about him staring at me in meetings while I was completely unaware. I thought about all the times I'd been alone in an elevator with him, or stayed late working and he'd wandered by my desk, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something worse could have happened if people hadn't spoken up. I got an offer from another company 2 months later and put in my notice. My manager tried to convince me to stay, said they valued me, that they'd make accommodations, that I shouldn't let this drive me away. But it wasn't about accommodations. It was about the fact that I'd never feel comfortable there again. The place was tainted. HR did everything right. They protected me. They built a case. They took action. But the damage was already done. I'd spent months being the subject of someone's obsession without even knowing it. And now that I knew, I couldn't unknow it. I couldn't unfeel the creeping sensation of being watched. I ran into one of my old coworkers a few months after I left. She told me Mark had tried to get another job in the industry, but word had spread. People knew what he'd done. He was basically unhireable. Part of me felt vindicated, but mostly I just felt tired. The whole experience taught me that you can do everything right and still end up a victim. I was professional. I was polite. I didn't encourage anything. And it didn't matter. He decided I was someone he could fixate on, and I had no control over that. The only thing I could control was how I responded once I found out. And my response was to leave, to protect myself, to choose my own peace over a job that no longer felt safe. I'm in a better place now. New job, new environment, no weird messages or lingering stares. But I'm more cautious, more aware. I don't assume people's intentions are good just because they're senior or well liked. And I definitely don't ignore my gut anymore. Because looking back, there were moments where something felt off. But I talked myself out of it, told myself I was being paranoid. And I wasn't. HR protected me. But I'll never feel safe in that building again. And honestly, I'm okay with that. Because sometimes walking away is the only way to reclaim what someone tried to take from you. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, the truth has a way of finding the light, whether it's hidden in a diary, buried in a DNA test, or accidentally CC'd on an email. The people we trust the most can sometimes be the ones with the biggest secrets, and the smallest mistakes can unravel the most carefully constructed lies. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're officially part of the crew. Hit subscribe, drop a comment about which story hit you the hardest, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, sleep tight and maybe check your partner's emergency contacts just in case.